forward. And I have created this podcast, this live series, to bring together some of the innovators and thought leaders that are able to talk about what is happening in our new world and how we can move forward. I am absolutely delighted to bring today, on Labor Day in Canada and the USA, Ludmila Praslova. She is an organizational psychologist, professor of graduate organizational psychology, and the director of research at Vanguard University of Southern California. It is such an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled and stoked to be here and to talk to you today.
Thank you so much. So the big question I ask right at the very beginning is, what are you stoked about in our new world right now?
Well, I think we all know that our old normal wasn't super great in some ways. It was great in many ways, but I don't think we were doing all that great in the area of diversity and appreciating differences and including different kinds of people and helping them belong in the world and specifically in the workplace. So I think we have an opportunity to rebuild the world for more inclusion and equity and belonging, because we do have diversity, but we have not been able to use it to maximize all of our collective thriving.
So when I hear you talk about that, I nod my head. My 2019 head nods, because when I wrote my book, Elephants Before Unicorns last year, I had a chapter in there about, you can't have diversity without inclusivity, and all the organizations are falling flat on their face on how to actually manage that. So 2020 is a different story, where everybody's having to look very deeply into the systems of the organization. So if I can ask you the question, if from an independent perspective, like from an individual's perspective and an organization's perspective, Caroline, how can they do that?
Well, I kind of have a strange, unique experience, whichever you want to call it. I started working in global diversity and intercultural relations back when I was in college. So that was quite a few years ago. So
we're not 21 anymore.
Yes. So I started with a global perspective and cross-cultural relationships, cross-cultural psychology, which was my dissertation, and this very big picture perspective. And then I started studying organizational cultures and what organizational cultures do to influence our performance and functioning and thriving as individuals, and looking at it in intersection of organizations and national cultures, and then specific types of diversity within countries. And then finally, I get to looking at the level of diversity that's on our individual brains and our neurodiversity. So it's a very broad perspective. But one thing that I learned from working in intercultural relations is that diversity is a whole lot of fun. And back when I was 25 years old and head of intercultural relations for a large not-for-profit, we were having a whole lot of fun. And it was literally assert culture. We worked with what is called culture fit. Not culture fit, but culture add. So nice. Culture add means we all learn from each other. There's no dominant culture, and we can have mashed potatoes and kimchi at the same time. And it was just such a great experience that taught me that it actually is possible. That diversity doesn't have to be this horrible thing that people complain about because they say, oh, we just have to do it because of compliance. So my understanding is that the compliance mindset when it comes to diversity is something that has been an issue with many organizational applications. And yes, sometimes there need to be rules and regulations, but I think we need to switch the mindset from thinking, okay, so we have to do those things to, no, it's an opportunity to bring in incredible range of talent that otherwise we wouldn't have if we don't bring in diverse people and we don't allow them to thrive within our organizations, we're limiting what our organizations can do and produce. So switching from compliance mindset, just as a very large perspective, not going into toolbox, but leaving this mindset in the old normal and going into the new normal with collective thriving and common benefit mindset, that might be something that will really could make diversity a lot of fun, because I know it can be.
Yes. I really appreciate what you're saying. I'm mindful that some people might be watching this and they might be saying, "My gosh, that's such a liberal mindset there. You know, that sounds political." How, I don't know if you've had that, kind of statement thrown at you, but how would you answer that if you had that kind of pushback?
I don't know how psychology becomes political. I think in some people's minds, if you expect something to be political, you can make anything to be political. Right. But to me, it's just a human issue, and the issue that is allowing people to work to the maximum of their talents helps companies work to the maximum of their abilities, helps the economy work to the maximum of their abilities. And it's definitely not something that I would envision as political, because again, it's not even something that's specific to any particular nation or national politics. The approach is going to look very different in Ireland or Rwanda. But we all need the mindset that humans are valuable and they bring gifts and talents to what they do.
It's I've said this before, and I'm going to probably say it for the next 5 years, which is that we need a mindset policy reset. So we understand, what our biases are, what prejudices we have, and, look around and work out what is missing. Why are we not showing in that particular way? So it's very, very clear that you are working in this area. I've read your articles, and you're so, you're not going to like this word, but powerful in the way that you communicate what is the right way forward. So I kind of feel like this question is a little bit redundant, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I really want to hear your answer, which is, one of the reasons why I wanted to create this podcast was because John Lewis had died. And his statement that he wanted to create good trouble in the world was just like, yes, that is where we should be right now. What good trouble are we creating in this world? So let me ask you, what good trouble are you creating?
Okay. Well, first of all, obviously, I don't have a claim to being absolutely right, the right person in the world, but John Lewis definitely is an example of doing things right for the right reason. So I'm doing something that obviously aligns with my experience, but my experience is really all about diversity and different forms of diversity. So I'm trying to bring attention to how having a perspective on diversity and inclusion that is inclusive is going to enrich everyone, because yes, we can look at gender, but if we only look at gender, then women with disabilities are going to get left behind. Right. If we're only looking at race, then we're still going to leave people with disabilities behind, because the discrimination in that particular area happens prior to hiring, and we start our interventions with hiring. So my idea is to try to bring awareness to the full spectrum of issues we need to pay attention to. And then again, every country has their own history and their own experiences. So yes, US is going to be different from Ireland, and within US, Miami is going to be very different from Fairbanks. So we have even local differences and local populations that we need to look at and specifically address. But the general mindset, just trying to remind to people about value of people of very different walks of life, and considering the variety of invisible barriers that exist in organizations that are not visible to those who haven't hit those barriers because they've been privileged for a variety of reasons not to run into those barriers. And we are very often limited to our experience. So what I'm trying to do is to help people to look at the world and the workplace from a variety of different perspectives.
Very good. So you talked about spectrums, you talked about gender, you talked about disability. One of the things I find is that I work a lot in technology and creative technologies, and I find that there is a misunderstanding still about people with autism spectrum. And I read in one of your articles that I think 92% of people with autism are able to perform at a much higher level than people, and please correct me if I'm wrong, 92% are not are able to surpass others in their work and their performance and productivity, but there's about 85% of the autism population that are unemployed because they are not, in my language, not understood. So what do you think about that?
Yes, so let me just restate it. And it is based on studies with autistic caring programs that is specific to tech. And in this particular pilot, it was found that they were 92% more productive than other individuals in the same job position when they were properly matched to the job. So job match is definitely a very important factor. And overall unemployment rates, yes, we have in most kind of Western world, US and UK, numbers around 80%, 85%, and up to 90%. And that is for autistic people with college degrees. So obviously they are able to perform on a very high level. And there's also another thing that you will hear: if you met one autistic person, you met one autistic person. And there's a very broad range of abilities as well as a very broad range of differences. And so far, we have seen a lot of hiring in tech industries, capitalizing on abilities of those who are very good with coding, with tech, with cybersecurity. So there are programs from Israel military to leading companies like Microsoft, but that leaves a large segment of people still outside because there are those who have completely different range of abilities, not tech, but creative abilities. There's a range of difficulties also that's not always recognized with entry into organizations, such as some people have very significant difficulties interviewing and going through traditional process of selection, and that selection process is not tied to their actual job responsibilities. So when they are tested on their actual job responsibilities, as there was this well-known case recently with a young man who was nonverbal but was able to write this amazing computer application and get hired without having to say a word because his work was outstanding, but he needed to be tested through something that actually relevant to the skills that required for the job. And we're in the very beginning of doing that in general. And obviously it doesn't affect autistic people only, but it does affect significant percentage of autistic people to feed into those unemployment statistics that definitely are mind-blowing, even compared to other neurominorities.
So neurominorities, that's a great statement here. So it sounds like it's the responsibility of the organization to not from a governance perspective, because clearly that's or from a compliance perspective, because if you do it from a compliance perspective, everybody gets very concerned and they get fidgety but there needs to be some kind of flexibility in the interviewing process, in the reviewing of talent process, to just see how their abilities can actually contribute quite significantly from a value add perspective.
Exactly. And the hiring process need to be connected to the actual job responsibilities rather than putting everyone through the same process that maybe worked for the typical office worker in 1950s. And even though now people are saying, oh, we're going to have artificial intelligence screening everyone on their facial expressions during the interview. Well, that does not help at all in this particular case, because artificial intelligence is not trained in autistic talent. The facial expressions tend to be quite different from people who have been previously hired by organizations. So this is not something that has a very simple answer.
Okay, not a simple answer, but it sounds like everybody's working on it, because if you look at Frida Poli's company, Pymetrics, and look at Beth Porter's company as well, Riff Media, they're working towards solving that. They have a really strong drive to make that more equitable.
And I definitely appreciate the effort. I just want to make sure that we don't think, okay, this is going to solve all the problems.
Yes.
Because as soon as you say, okay, we're going to train the program on people who have been previously hired, people who have not been previously hired are not likely to benefit right away without very significant human interaction with how those programs are designed and transparency in the algorithm.
So clearly, from a talent leadership perspective, when an organization is looking to grow and evolve and be successful, lead and be successful in this new age, the AI age, and our new societal and economic awakening right now, it sounds like it really needs to be a situation whereby right at the very top, this particular aspect needs to be reviewed. Too often, recruiting is the last thing that people think about. And as we know, talent is what creates the organization, not the foosball tables, not the number of weeks you get on vacation and stuff like that. So what tip would you give to an organization on how to start that?
Well, again, it's a very complex problem that has many different places. But I would think one of the things is don't put diversity into the corner of an organization or assign it strictly to HR. And I'm stealing this because there was I heard this phrase at a conference, but I can't remember the attribution, but it's all organizations already have a chief diversity officer. It's called CEO. And the responsibility of at least the mindset of making sure that organization brings the broad spectrum of talent does come from CEOs. And obviously they may not necessarily come into the nitty gritty, but they need to accept the overall responsibility and then arrange whatever makes sense for this particular organization. And obviously it's going to influence HR, it's going to influence training of different levels of manager, it's going to influence training of everyone in being able to work with a diverse range of people. But I definitely would hope that organizations would start with considering that chief diversity officer is really a CEO, because it needs to start very high, even though grassroots is also very powerful.
Yeah, it's very hard to actually make that shift unless it comes from the CEO. I 100% agree. I'm so glad you said that. Thank you. It was that's very, very powerful. Okay, so this seems like a stupid question, but why is it emotionally intelligent for us to do this, to take this, to move this forward, this diversity, and to really bring it all together in this particular way? Because it's a big topic. It's a huge topic. It's the future of organizations and the world.
It is a huge topic. And when we're talking about emotional intelligence is culturally embedded as most of our human psychological functioning. So we need to understand cultures on a global cross-cultural level to fully understand emotional intelligence and utilize it, because it has an element of cultural intelligence. And it is also embedded on the level of brain functioning. And this is where we get into neurodiversity. And so sometimes people say, well, neurominorities or specifically autistic people have deficits in processing emotion in other people. Well, actually, neuromajority have the same difficulty processing of emotion in autistic people. So it actually goes both ways. And saying that those people are deficient and we're not deficient is actually not quite fair, because it does go both ways. So understanding of differences in both cultural and neurological functioning with pretty large segments of population. They're not majorities, but they definitely are pretty significant segments of population that process emotional related information differently, is something that really improves all of our emotional intelligence and ability to function in an emotionally intelligent way in the world, as you so beautifully talk about in your book.
Oh, thank you. Well, can I just say, you just said it much more beautifully than I did. So, because I come from a business side, you come from a deep organizational psychologist background throughout your career, and you just articulated it beautifully. So thank you. My very last question to you is, what one step can people take from this interview with you that they can take forward?
Okay, thank you. And I do think that elephants versus unicorns is a great concept, by the way. So I don't know if I would have come up with that. But one step that we could take, which I actually tried to do myself, because I'm trying to be aware of different perspectives. And it's something that I've done with, different courses that I've taught with students. And I think a lot of CEOs could also benefit from it. And that is taking a different perspective every day. So one day, try to take a perspective of someone who is much older than you. And try to see how the world, what you are doing, is impacting people who are in the older age group. The next day, try to think about people with sensory sensitivities, people who literally feel like they're beaten with a baseball bat if they walk into a lobby and there's loud music playing. So that's another perspective. Try to think from a perspective of you're making a decision about your organization. How will that impact people who have mobility issues? And how would that impact single mothers with children? How does it impact single people when you're trying to make a variety of decisions? So trying to take a different perspective every day is, I think, an exercise that most people can benefit from on the individual level. And if organizations integrate that into decision making, and that's one of the things that I'm working on, how to help organizations to consider multiple perspectives in decision making with a cheat sheet, because it seems hard and overwhelming. So I'm trying to simplify it for them. But that is something that I think would help us to not just exercise our brain, but increase kindness in the world. Because the next step is, how would you conduct your business or do something to help those people, to help people who are very different from you? And even if we are tired and depressed and not feeling great, that's one way that can help us. Helping someone, we know it from social psychology established over and over and over again, helping other people and being kind is actually something that's great for our own well-being. But don't do it for selfish reasons. Do it because it makes the world a better place.
Wonderful, wonderful. You just sparked another point, actually. I wanted to close it on there, but you just sparked something, which is not doing it to make it you feel good, but for doing it for the greater good. And Nickelodeon were found after they had, I think, put something on social media about supporting autism. And then 1,000 autistic people were typing in the comments and they were all removed. That I understand. Yeah. That I understand is harmful advocacy. So I'm just thinking from a CEO's perspective, who will want to just say, okay, let's do this. We're supporting them. It's like it really needs to be integrated with everything, with community If you're doing something on social media or you're supporting it, you're dealing from a community perspective. The community managers know how to communicate with people who do have that. Who do have a condition that whereby there is that empathy to communicate in a particular way, and obviously throughout the rest of the organization as well.
Nothing about us without us. That has been used by many groups, including many neurominority activism groups. And that definitely makes perfect sense, that if you're trying to speak on behalf of someone, but then you remove their voice, that is pretty hard to see your efforts as sincere.
It certainly is. So food for thought there, everyone. How can you truly integrate thoughtful behaviors with the challenges that people who are not like you need to deal with? So Ludmila, you've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's been fabulous to spend some time with you.
Thank you. Have a great Labor Day.
Yes, enjoy.